we have a thick binder today of stuff, so we'll go ahead and get started. So first, let's go around and do roll call. Just say your name. Cool. Okay, let's start in here. Kat Pullman.
Phyllis Goodson.
Val Jean Estes.
Sean Sullivan.
Dave Mays.
Andrea Bennett.
Lindsay Halleck.
Perfect. Last but not least,
PJ Klein.
thank you, sir. Awesome. So I know that we had one edit to the August minutes. Does anyone have any other edits, or does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you, PJ. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah. All opposed? Cool. All right, we'll move on to the second item, just offshore wind in North Carolina presentation. I'll hand it off to you.
All right, thank you. Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about offshore wind. My background is primarily in the offshore surveying, collecting data ahead of construction, but I tried to give this presentation, deliver it with the interest of the committee involved and not so much on my own interest. While you may find it interesting what I do, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for this committee. But so how are we going to do the presentation?
You guys all have a copy of it, I think. All of you Zoom folks have a copy of it.
All right.
You should be able to share. Yeah, share screen right in the middle.
The green one. I know, I always look at green out too.
Can you guys see that online?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. All right, so the title slide just shows you, North Carolina and the various leases that are active are shown in black, and the potential plan development areas are blue. And you can see there are some blue areas farther offshore in North Carolina, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. But the main ones in North Carolina are the Kitty Hawk Wind Energy area, which is east of Kitty Hawk, and then the Wilmington East area, which is just south of us right now. Yeah. And I just wanted to start on kind of a summary of this recent market report as it applies to offshore wind in the U.S. The pipeline, the first point here is that there's only 42 megawatts currently online. Now that's in two areas. One's in Block Island, which is south of Rhode Island. And then there's two turbines that are actively producing energy in Virginia, which is part of their a smaller plan, kind of like a research plan there. But further down the line, there's over, close to 52 gigawatts in development, over 32 leases in the US, with the East Coast having the majority of these leases. Recently, there's been lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico, which didn't garner too much interest. And also there was a lease sale in California, which did get quite a bit of interest, although a lot of the turbines there would have to be floating turbines, which is somewhat new technology. The leading states is New York. Massachusetts also has a lot, in New Jersey, as far as trying to procure the offshore wind. When they have these lease sales, at the very beginning, back in 2016 and before that, they didn't really garner a lot of interest, I think, because the technology wasn't really well known, and so large expanses of offshore areas sold for pretty cheap or were leased from the federal government for fairly cheap. But a more recent auction in 2022, which was in the New York Bight area, garnered 5.4 billion. So it really had, and a lot of the developers for the offshore wind are oil and gas companies too. So they're trying to offset their carbon input print. And then I think another important thing that I'll touch on here is kind of the supply chain or manufacturing needed to build these wind farms, and that, you know, we really have to expand upon this if we want these projects to move forward. And there's some hiccups right now that I'll talk about that, you know, maybe just by educating others and trying to promote offshore wind, we can get more manufacturing here in North Carolina. The headwinds is just has a lot to do with supply chain issues, some having to do with COVID-19, and also the fact that a lot of the development for offshore wind is taking place in Europe, and so we haven't really built our supply chain here in the U.S., although that is moving forward. And also the permitting and regulatory aspects of offshore wind have been lengthier than originally thought. So projects that were hoping to go on into the operations side much earlier have been prolonged and are just finally being constructed in Massachusetts and in New York. Next slide. Oh, I kind of skipped over. Oh, that's fine. You'll just see that some of the northeastern states well, Virginia into the northeast are already procuring offshore wind energy. You know, Massachusetts on the order of 3.2 gigawatts, New York and New Jersey. And because these states are, you know, actively pursuing this power, that's why they got higher bid. Like New York got a lot of high bids in their lease sale. And so what happened was after the New York Bight lease sale was the North Carolina lease sale, as well as California came after that. And that didn't get as high bids as the New York Bight lease sale. But you'll just see that how large these projects are, and, you know, who's procuring the energy, and when these goals of procuring this energy are planned to take place. If you look on to the right slide, you'll just see that, you know, what's needed to build these offshore wind farms, as far as, you know, the different supplies needed, whether it's blades, towers, monopiles, foundations, that sort of thing. And that there's still quite a bit to be, you know, quite a bit still needed to build these all in the US. All right, next slide. And this is just an introductory slide. You can go on NYSERDA's webpage, which I have a link to under the source. But it just kind of gives an overview of what a wind turbine is, what its different parts are, and how big it is. So you can see they're pretty large structures, you know, almost comparable in size to the Empire State Building, much bigger than the Statue of Liberty. And you'll see that under how offshore wind works, kind of the various parts of a wind farm. You have the turbines, their foundations, the cables, which then go into an offshore substation, which is known as an electrical service platform. And then from there, there's a transmission cable that leads back to shore, where it goes to a substation on shore. And so surveying all these areas and trying to decide, you know, where are the most optimal sites to build these things is part of what I do, making sure that we aren't disrupting environmentally sensitive areas or potential archaeological resources. Yeah. Now, I used to work for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They're the federal agency that's responsible for offshore wind. They, in the past, they were more focused on oil and gas in the Gulf and Alaska, and a smaller part in California. But now with the increase in interest in renewables, that's really a lot of, well, not a lot of what they do, but a good portion of what they do. They have, yeah, how am I doing time-wise? I mean, they have a series of steps that they go through before construction begins, and it starts with planning and analysis, which is pretty much done by BOEM itself, and where they identify areas, they kind of go through the NEPA and make sure that you're not having any environmental significant environmental impacts, and they'll issue an environmental assessment statement. After that, they go and figure out whether or not people are interested in the lease, and then they'll have a competitive lease sale where it's like a bid round where each various developers bid on a lease, and then it keeps on going until, you know, the highest bidder wins that lease. After that, BOEM will, the developers will do a site assessment, where they go out and do a relatively small survey to put a mid-ocean tower. So they're trying to figure out what are the wind and wave conditions like at the site. And they'll submit a report for that. It's kind of like an early site investigation study because it's a small area. BOEM will either most likely accept it if they do a good job and there's no environmental issues. And then the developer will build offshore, or typically they put in what they call FLIDARs, which are floating LIDARs, where they, it's basically like a big buoy that measures the wind and waves at the site. And then after the SAP is approved, it's called a SAP, they move on to doing more investigation, site characterization as part of the construction and operation plan. They submit this to the federal agency. And then that's kind of prior to them constructing that. Everyone talks about the COP. That's what's known as a construction operation plan, because that's really the end product that you need to meet before you get the federal government's approval to move forward with construction. And if you go to the next slide, it gives you kind of the various numbers that are there, tell you kind of the timeline as far as years that BOEM plans to, in a general idea of how long it takes to perform each part of these processes, where the site assessment plan is typically about a year long. The post-SAP is about 5 years long. And then you have the COP, and then they have about a year to review, and then they move, after moving forward, you'll have the installation of the various aspects of the wind farm. We can move over the slide. It kind of just repeats in maybe a bit more detail. And then just to give you, like I said, a lot of people will be talking about the construction operation plan, and I just took this. This is from Kitty Hawk North, their construction operation plan that was submitted in 2022, I believe. And it just, you'll kind of see under the volume 2, just all the various studies that are performed as part of this construction and operation plan, whether it's, you know, trying to figure out about sediment transport modeling, like if they're dredging an area, like how that affects the wildlife, marine, you know, site investigation report, which is what I do typically, air emissions, like all sorts of things. I mean, they're kind of typical for offshore projects, but just in case you were wondering, like, what actually goes into something before it gets approval, you can kind of just peruse through that long list and figure out what's there. So moving on. So why North Carolina? Well, number one, we have the largest offshore wind potential of any state on the East Coast. Like I said, there's currently 3 active leases in North Carolina. We have strong manufacturing capabilities that could feed directly into the offshore wind supply chain. And this would lead to potentially 140 billion economic investment and 85,000 jobs. Now, a lot of times you'll hear like a lot of large numbers and a lot of job opportunities. And I think what's key to that is that we take advantage of this supply chain and this potential, but we have to move quick, or else it will either go to another state or continue coming from Europe and elsewhere. If you postpone on building the infrastructure needed, or the various manufacturing plants, you'll lose out on a lot of these opportunities. Yep.
So we have two of the 3 leases are off
Wilmington, right?
Wilmington,
And then
Where-
Kitty Hawk.
right?
Yeah.
Where are our 2 leases in terms of that timeline?
Well, I actually show it at the very end when I talk about moving forward, but
Okay, sorry.
where we just, so I can just tell you, but I was trying to end on
I
the
don't want
positive.
to just disrupt your flow, man.
Don't worry, it hasn't been perfected, but all right, well, I'll tell you then. But we're at the site assessment plan stage with Wilmington. They just carried out the surveys to do that. So then they have about a year to write it up and send to BOEM. So it's all about the mid-ocean at this point, and that just took place. So all the websites, so all this stuff really comes from all the information in this packet or presentation comes from other people's websites. And I tried to give credit on pretty much every single slide as to where I got it. If there is and Dave can, I don't know if they're active in this PDF, but they're active in the PowerPoint, so we can send it to everyone. Yeah, if that doesn't work. But the point was also just to give you guys information. If you want to go find out more, you can click on these links, learn about the supply chain, learn about, what is the Department of DEQ doing, what is BOEM doing, what are these, these various nonprofit organizations doing for offshore wind. So the ones listed on this website are like the main ones that I looked at when producing this PowerPoint. And on the next slide, the Southeastern Wind Coalition is really big. They put on a lot of events here. There's been like offshore wind drinks, several of them. Right after the lease sale for Wilmington, it was really a lot of people attended, and then it's kind of like died off a bit, but hopefully it will continue here. But they do a lot of studies just trying to keep the public informed and try to work with developers and try to understand what's going on. I know, Dave, you said you talked to is it Carly Lohan? Yeah. And about offshore wind in North Carolina. And you can go on there. So basically, I'm just saying you can go to their website, look at these various things. If you want to know what an offshore wind turbine looks in Wilmington East, go there and they'll show you these little dots in the horizon. Or if you want to find out more about like supply chain and that sort of thing, you can go there. Yeah. So we kind of went over these BOEM active leases. I wanted to highlight ones that were just north of us in Virginia, and then also the one in Kitty Hawk and Wilmington. I'll only go over the one or details of the one in Kitty Hawk and Carolina Long Bay. That's what the Wilmington projects are known as. In coastal Virginia, they've been doing that for quite some time. I was involved in some studies done in there back in 2014, and some of the data collected was back in 2012. So Virginia is a little bit ahead of us as far as interest in offshore wind, and they have both a commercial lease in east of Virginia Beach, and then they also have a research lease, and that's where they built 2 12-megawatt turbines that were installed in 2020. Kitty Hawk has been split into 2 different projects, north and a south, and then in Carolina Long Bay you have 2 developers, Duke Energy and then Total Energy, which is used to be primarily an oil and gas company. What I didn't go over it in details, but there's this task force that was put into place by Governor Cooper called the Towers. I don't remember exactly what its acronym stands for, but I know I gave Dave a link, and I think Richard as well. You can sign up to get their their monthly updates where they kind of give you what's been going on in the last month, what they've done as far as outreach. They'll go to schools and try to inform people about offshore wind. But it's a really good thing to be, at least to get that update, because it keeps you informed, and also because sometimes it's not always the best advertised or productivity in the area. So you either have to kind of like cherry pick from news articles, but just having like one source is a good place to get it. So I encourage you guys to sign up to get that info. So you'll see that in North Carolina, the Kitty Hawk North, they have their construction operation plan submitted in 2021, and they expect to have their environmental impact statement by 2023. The South project is a little bit behind that one. They did submit their COP, but they still have to, I'm not sure exactly how that project is moving forward because it was split after the COP, I believe, how the COP was submitted. And then in Carolina Long Bay, like I said, that in this slide right here, this is a bit of an older slide. They said they anticipate their site assessments plan this summer, which did happen in August. So it's good to see that those projects moving forward. Okay.
Was that for both of them?
Yeah, so they did kind of like a joint survey.
Great.
Yeah. And then this is just like a permitting dashboard. This is a federal webpage, I believe. where you can go on, you can find out about all these different wind projects or just the ones in North Carolina or even other projects of interest that aren't related to offshore wind and get an idea of where they are as far as timelines, like what's been submitted and where they are.
I have a question.
Yeah,
This is really interesting. Thanks for this. When the project is going through this process, are they also talking with Duke about transmission and like designing that piece of it as well? Or is it just designing and getting approved the actual site of generation?
no, like a lot. So it's a little bit different here and I'm not, I haven't been involved in the Kitty Hawk project to know how they're interacting with Duke and Dominion in Virginia. But a lot of times in the Northeast, they'll get a power purchase agreement, like there will be some sort of agreement. And so that, they'll work with the utility companies to try to bring the power onshore and then distribute it. With Duke being a developer, I mean, they have to have some of that. They're definitely thinking about it, but I think some of and I don't know firsthand, but I think some of the project, some of the issues the Kitty Hawk project has had is they're in the middle of the Outer Banks. So they don't have like a big city to go directly to, or so like to get the cost of a project increases with this, the length of your cable. And so they're kind of looking, I think, at Virginia Beach or like around Morehead City, I believe. Or maybe it's even New Bern. So you have to kind of bring the cable where there is like a substation or infrastructure already present. And so that's a lot of the upfront thoughts when they're performing the surveys that I'm involved in is trying to find a place onshore that they can bring the power. And you kind of have to do that before you do any of the surveys. But yeah, it's a long process. You have to, I think in one of the links, if you go on BOEM's website, you can find out how many interactions Duke and Total have had in North Carolina. Like you have to get in touch with the Coast Guard, the tribes. I mean, I'm not even gonna list them all. There's so many because there's so many stakeholders that you have to really involve them. And so yeah, it's a long process.
All right, sorry, and like follow up to that, is the Kitty Hawk project like through any part of the process where like some NIMBYism or some like local, maybe people are upset about seeing them from their houses or something? Has it already like survived that bit of the part?
I don't hear that much about the Kitty Hawk, the NIMBYism there. I don't know if it's the Outer Banks. I mean, I think Richard mentioned on our last meeting, or maybe it was right after the meeting, about how he went to New Jersey and they have a lot of, I don't know if it's all NIMBYism, but it's like, yeah, people are against it. A lot of it does have to do with just not being able to see the turbine and they want their pristine beach, view. And some people don't want the cables coming close to them. I know that was an issue up in Long Island. And I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest issues here is that, especially it being close to Bald Head, you're probably going to get a lot of that. Mainly in the Northeast and Massachusetts, what I hear is commercial fishermen that really are the big naysayers because you're taking away areas that they could be making money and they want their voice to be heard really well. And yeah, that's what I would say. But there were earlier projects in the middle, in between Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, that basically it seemed like NIMBYism was what killed that project. It's called Cape Wind. But yeah, so it's there. I mean, it's all, it's a lot of moving parts. So, all right.
You're good.
Good.
Yeah, we got 2 more minutes.
10 more. Whoa.
Oh, you need more?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just keep going.
All right.
You're good.
You have an hour and a half left.
All right, well, I won't stay too long on this slide. Let's just go. You'll see, yeah, let's go to the next. This is just the Kitty Hawk North. It's just showing where it is as far as the its activities and moving forward. You'll see slides like this. Just goes back to that BOEM permitting process of the various tasks that are being performed and when they anticipate to start construction operations. You can see the Kitty Hawk South 2030 is when it plans to do commercial operations. I just highlighted this. You'll see this again later in the slide deck for Carolina Long Bay area. Yeah. And there's been pretty good studies. I would recommend if you're interested in offshore wind to look at this building, North Carolina's offshore wind supply chain. They looked at the various ports to figure out what they could provide and how they compared with other ports that are already involved in offshore wind. You know, they're big. They look primarily at the Port of Wilmington and the Port of Morehead City. I was interested in this one statement they had on like where they what did they say that the North Carolina Port Authority indicated a strong preference for like Radio Island, which is near Morehead City. And I didn't, maybe I didn't read the report well enough, but I was just kind of curious as to why Wilmington didn't score higher to get more interest. And I think Governor Cooper was here recently trying to talk to the Port of Wilmington and trying to find out more on how we could build into the supply chain. Okay. And this just basically summarizes everything I've said, where this was the towers, the task force that Governor Cooper put together, that the North Carolina really lags compared to most states in developing offshore wind infrastructure and the supply chain. A lot of the states that are more active in trying to get pure energy, they're farther along, and they're going to get more tier 1 suppliers, and that you know, we risk losing out on the money and jobs created as part of those offshore wind. Yeah. I looked a little like supply chain is not my area of expertise, but I did try to find out more about, you know, where is the supply and, you know, how could we somehow get more involved. The U.S. offshore wind market report shows that there's not much activity going on. I think most of these little dots in the on the map are tier 1, so like builders of the turbines or the cells or the various cables. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see this kind of just summarizes along the East Coast where the real kind of the tier 1 suppliers have been building their facilities. In Portsmouth, Virginia, you have Siemens Gamesa that are building the first blade facility in the US, which is pretty important. And then in Charleston, you have Nexans, which is building this high voltage subsea cable plant, which I know has already been used for a project in the Northeast. Okay, next slide. This just shows kind of the various parts of an offshore wind supply chain, the various raw materials needed, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll see that they talk about port locations for various facilities. And you'll see North Carolina twice in there, but it's listed as in green, which means required facilities. One is a blade manufacturer, and the other one is a, I think it was gravity-based foundation. And I'm not sure exactly why it's there. I guess it's because we're in shallow water. We need a different wind turbine foundation. Okay, next slide. And then the Southeastern Wind Coalition also has their own supply chain database. It was a little bit difficult to go through this because they list a lot of this like engineering firms multiple times and at their various offices, you know, so it was hard to really understand like how much do we actually have here. So I went, you can see all the various colors correspond to what that dot is representing, whether they are supplying turbine parts or foundation parts or offshore services. So what I did on the next slide, just to try to kind of understand things more, is I went and I just looked at kind of the big things like the blades, towers, the foundations, transmission, and tried to highlight the various companies that are in North Carolina that can be providing the various services. Now, I'm not familiar with all these companies, but I tried to list on that Southeastern Wind Coalition website what they plan to provide. Like, there's no one that's even though it says blade rotors, it doesn't mean that they're providing the blade and rotors, are providing parts for the blade and rotors. But there are still some fairly big companies that could impact the offshore wind supply chain. Nucor, which has, does a lot of steel development, they're already building some, I just put a little news highlight next to them, what they're building for offshore wind specifically. So I think this is an area where, probably to concentrate on. All right, next slide. And I made this PowerPoint presentation, or part of it, about a month ago or 2 months ago. And at the time, there was this potential for all those areas in deeper waters to be leased. And so at the time, it was really interesting because it means like more work for me, but also more potential for North Carolina. But unfortunately, if you go to the next slide, since then, those areas have been removed as potential leasing areas for this next bid round. And so F and D have been removed, which are kind of just east of North Carolina. And so they decided to move forward, I think, with C, part of B, and part of A. Now, the reason for removing D, I tried to look into it, is because of conflicts, I believe, with the military. The reason for removing F, which is in deeper waters and will require like moorings and floating wind turbines, I believe is because they just need to review the area more. And so I kind of put what I could find in there if you choose to read it. And you'll see that Governor Cooper had a comment where he was kind of disappointed that they didn't move forward with these lease areas in east of North Carolina.
Who decides that?
The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They talk with all these different federal agencies and try to figure out, make sure they deconflict any sort of issue like military usage or sensitive species or habitats, that sort of thing. Okay. And this is just something that came after that, just a bunch of quotes from the News and Observer, and that by removing these lease areas, it means that North Carolina is going to have, it may kind of stop some interest and, in building the supply chain in North Carolina, because if you constantly have active lease sales, it means people are interested, we're going to develop it. And so it's also, it's that I think that basically they passed this clause that a wind lease must occur within a year of an oil and gas lease sale. Because they just had an oil and gas lease sale, that means like within the year they're gonna have another wind lease sale. But because we don't have any active or proposed leases, and we're kind of losing out on that activity. And then
Wait, is that like a stat attempt to like offset any future emissions that they're putting on the grid?
I don't really know the background to that comment. I almost think it was probably an agreement between people that wanted oil and gas and people that want to lease, but I could be wrong. I'd have to read more about it. I just saw it recently, so I figured I'd include it. All right. And then more hurdles. So, if you remember back into my earlier slide where I was showing what had been procured so far by the various states, a lot of these companies, now that they're seeing that what they originally thought was financially viable, their projects, they're backing out. Now, there's still projects moving forward, but I know that at least, I think 2 in Massachusetts and 1 in New York, where the developers have basically backed out of the power purchase agreement because project's no longer viable. But with that being said, Massachusetts is I think they've just announced that they're going to have their largest offshore wind procurement because of these issues and trying to get more offshore wind. I think it will end up being that the government probably has to step in and have more subsidies or something for offshore wind, because if these states still want to reach a lot of these goals and they dependent on offshore wind to provide them, they're going to have to find a common ground. And a lot of money's been put into a lot of these projects already, so we'll see what moves forward. But it's kind of I wouldn't say it's new, but it's kind of more of it coming into the limelight is that yeah, it's becoming more obvious and becoming one of the largest developers for offshore wind in the world. Recently said they're thinking about potentially just bagging everything in the US. I don't think that will happen, but you know, if that happens, that could be a huge impact to offshore wind for sure. Okay. And then I don't know, I mean, I have not had a chance to really review Duke's new proposed carbon plan, but I'll just note that their P3 base, which was their preferred base, they didn't account for any offshore wind. So I think that also kind of tells, potential suppliers that not the best information if they want to try to build things in North Carolina. Okay. But moving forward on a positive note, this project I've been working on since in 2018 is now moving forward. They got boats in the water all the time, building the turbines. They're providing energy to Massachusetts. It's cool to see all the activity. I mean, the turbines going up, the cables being put to the ground. And so that's really exciting. I mean, these are really large vessels and a lot of money went into these projects. So that's one of the exciting things. There's another project that was also approved that's in construction. It's called the South Fork Wind Farm. This one's the Vineyard Wind Farm. And then finally, finally moving forward in North Carolina. So they did their site assessment plan surveys in August. They used a local NV5 geodynamics survey vessel, and that will allow them to now write their site assessment plan, submit it to BOEM, and then hopefully move on to putting not a med-ocean tower, med-ocean buoy in the water and find out more. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see kind of the same sort of planning schematic that we had for earlier for Kitty Hawk and other projects. And you'll just kind of see where this is Total's portion of the Wilmington police areas, like where they see themselves and how long it will take. They did already ask for a 1-year extension. Normally the site assessment plan is supposed to be submitted within a year, but they asked for another year, so it will be submitted next year. Okay. And then what can we do? I threw this together relatively quickly, but I think, the important thing is to educate ourselves and others and try to inform others. We can go to local events and advertise them or like them on LinkedIn or other social media sites, trying to start engaging with the stakeholders and developers and others involved in offshore wind, and learning about the supply chain needs and how we can, how local businesses can fill those needs. Monitoring other offshore wind activities in the Northeast as elsewhere and the overseas, and using our knowledge to advocate for policies that are pro offshore wind at the local, state, and federal level. Thanks.
Excellent. Snaps for Sean. All right.
One thing, I was actually just listening to this the other day. So the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association and CSEA, they just did a podcast on the carbon plan, and they had, I'm blanking on her name, from the Offshore Wind Coalition.
Carly.
Not Carly.
Might be your boss. Yeah, I don't remember.
Anyway, she was on there with Dave Rogers from Sierra Club, and they were talking about the new carbon plan that Duke just proposed, and she really gave some interesting information there about like offshore wind. And so if anybody's interested, that podcast is a really good resource for that.
Yeah, squeaky clean.
Squeaky clean, yeah.
Yeah.
Always good information on that. Seems like, I'm not sure how much our Chamber of Commerce is advocating or involved in, looking, they're all about business opportunities and bringing those to the state.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we have to, our focus, and that's not really my area of expertise, but trying to figure out how we can get more companies here, even if it's, we don't develop these offshore wind areas in Wilmington, or if they're put on delay, you can still provide supplies to other offshore wind sites. I mean, the Nexon's cable facility is up in like North Charleston, and they're being used by a company or the developer up in basically Long Island, New York. So it's not just a transit time, it's, building these facilities and supplying it to all the East Coast, I would say.
Along with the Inflation Reduction, wanting to buy within the United States, that's gonna just amplify people's want and need.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah. no problem.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions, concerns, or ambiguities for Sean? Awesome. We're gonna move on to item number 3.
Sorry, I was trying to come off mute and using my bumble fingers. I just wanted to say thank you for that awesome presentation. I screenshot a couple things, very informative. Also, I was just happened to be in Ireland last week, and the units that are up, not out on the water, but across the country, it's pretty impressive. They're up and running big time.
Yeah, so I think the Towers Initiative has, they have, what is it, MOUs with either Denmark and or the UK, because they're trying to find out more about offshore wind and how to promote it here. I sat in on like a port, well, I don't remember the name of the meeting, but it was recently just about, they were talking with, heads of ports in the UK, Scotland, about like what we need to do to make North Carolina ports ready for offshore wind. It was a good talk. It was actually one of the better ones. I'm trying to remember everything I learned, but I think it's also recorded. So these towers, they put a lot of their presentations online. You can go back and look at them. So.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Right. So item number 3, I'm gonna hand it off to David. Looks like you got quite a few bullet points.
Yeah, the first one being just a follow-up for the Solar for All grant. I know Lindsay you had some information at our last meeting about it. I think there's probably been a few updates. I don't know from your end, from your organization, if there's anything you want to highlight.
Yeah, sure. So we've been talking a lot with the NC Clean Energy Fund, which is going to be the green bank that's partnering with the State Energy Office on their application to the Solar for All program. The exciting thing is that the EPA actually extended the deadline for the applications, which is huge because it was real tight there. But also Governor Cooper had kind of told the State Energy Office that they needed to apply for the maximum award, which was $400 million. It is very difficult to see how $400 million worth of solar could be deployed on low-income households. And so that would have been a tough, a great goal, but like a tough, it's a lot of money. That's more money than like has ever come into any state for solar. And so we started kind of thinking about, so the EPA asked folks to tie their award amounts to the actual number of households in disadvantaged communities. And so I know Southern Environmental Law Center and my team at Vote Solar are kind of working with them to get a number so that we could have a good sense of how much we can ask for. But it looks like North Carolina is probably going to fall between like the $100 million and $250 million range, which is still like the most money ever. And then United Way is also in conversation with them about being a deployment partner, trying to get an actual housing organization in there that knows some of the challenges we might face, like roof age, are control panels upgraded enough? Like what kind of upgrades are these houses going to need before they're able to actually receive a rooftop PV system? So they're hashing all of that out. And then, we are kind of also thinking about how could we foresee a little bit, maybe using the endowment fund, how could we foresee what challenges we might have in our part of the state by maybe like test driving a solarized project that would be funded by the endowment. And so Waterway, which is like the nonprofit that I'm on, they're working with United Way and thinking about putting in an application to sort of test drive financing low income solar projects, because the biggest problem is, for people to qualify for solar loans, if you're low income and you have bad credit, it's very difficult to get approved for a loan that's unsecured, because the only thing that's securing the loan is the system itself. And so the interest rates are really high and the fees are often really high. And so trying to understand how we can get folks access to financing, or what would a successful Solar for All program look like that really makes these projects pencil out. So I think the biggest thing that I can really think about as far as like what this committee could do is, I think solar is still seen as like a kind of new and unsure, untested technology in this part of North Carolina. I think a lot of people don't know anyone who has solar on their roof, especially if you're low income. And I could just really see us playing an important role in community outreach, in normalizing the technology and explaining, the benefits of rooftop solar to folks, so that we make sure, Wilmington taxpayers are able to take advantage of all this money. So there's going to be a whole year of planning after the application gets approved. Like whatever award North Carolina gets, the applicant will have a whole year to do like outreach and to get feedback. But I do think cities should start thinking about what their role is going to be in outreach, and maybe how we could leverage like housing funds to get houses upgraded beforehand, or just identify communities that might be eligible, that sort of thing. So it seems like the State Energy Office and the Clean Energy Fund are on top of it. They're working with Duke. They're really, I think, going to come out with a super strong application.
Yeah, good. I know I'd heard about the application extension, which was good news. But yeah, just wanted to have another opportunity to update the group here on updates for that. Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity for the state to advance solar energy across the state. So.
And I think, even though it's also in our mission, of course, to like spread awareness about clean energy and that sort of thing, this could also, if done well and really implemented, I mean, getting this many rooftop systems on houses across the state at that scale really could clean up the grid to the point where it makes a meaningful difference in the energy we buy as the city. So I think we also have that part to play, is not just outreach to do the right thing for taxpayers, but outreach to actually get this thing to scale enough that it could make the other part of our job easier, which is getting 100% clean energy.
I mean, they're also looking at funding community solar projects as well through that fund, right?
Yes, and that's very difficult, because I think probably most of there are no community solar projects in Duke Energy territory in the Carolinas, because Duke Energy has not been able to design a policy that incentivizes community solar developers to come into their service territory. So it's going to be a tricky situation to incentivize them to come when the funding isn't permanent, and when the policy landscape isn't really by itself allowing projects to pencil out.
Yeah, there were some real spicy panel discussions at the State Energy Conference when you had some of the Duke Energy folks up on stage, along with some of the community solar advocates. So it was interesting to hear their back and forth.
Yeah, it's really throwing, I mean, we don't even this is also for multifamily housing, right? And that brought up the fact that in North Carolina, we don't have legislation that enables virtual net metering. So how would you even properly compensate people for the energy that they subscribe to? So a lot of advocacy work to be done at the state level for sure. And, anytime the cities can make it clear to their elected officials or to their representatives in the legislature, that these things are really wanted by cities and the taxpayers, I think is important.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be important to stay on top of this one and continue to update the group as the application gets submitted and more info is out there. But interesting, you said they're not going to be applying for what, up to 400, I think is what they were looking for before, but they're gonna tone that down. It seems
I
like.
think EPA got worried because everyone was like, well, why not? We'll go for the 400. But the problem is, like, if everybody went for the 400, a lot of states would have to get $0 to allow those states to get 400, because if you just average out the money, I think it's like 110 million per state. Some states didn't apply. I think like 6 of them have no applications or no one submitted an NOI. So I think EPA got worried, like, whoa, you guys are going to ask for 400, and then how are we going to decide who's getting 400, who's getting less? So they kind of came in and said, all right, it needs to be tied to the actual number of communities that would be eligible, which I think makes sense. So I think we're on the higher end of the 100 to 250 million range, but they're still pulling the data on, like, from the CEJST database and also the census database to get a sense for how many households there are. Yeah.
Thanks, Lindsay. Next, I just wanted to continue to kind of follow up on the community garden compost initiative that the UNCW grad students gave us a presentation on. And I know at our last meeting, Kat mentioned this David Brenner gentleman who has been very instrumental in doing the community gardens, private property, kind of across the community. So I just found this article on him in regard to kind of the process they went to and some of the locations that they were involved with across the city, which, you know, it's been a little while since this article was out, but I actually moved around this weekend and looked at some of the sites, and a lot of these gardens are still very much being used and in effect. And I just thought this could be not only good information in regard to us not reinventing the wheel in regard to this, but perhaps a good resource for us to perhaps reach out to, see if we can continue to support, expand the program across the city. So we're kind of still early stages about talking about this. It's something we want to look at going on city parks and all of the logistics around that. But I just found this article pretty interesting and just wanted to share it with the group more than anything else. So I don't know if any of you got a chance to look through it or anything, or have any questions about it, any additional comments. Just kind of wanted to open the floor to that. We can certainly just have it as a resource as we continue to.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at it.
Yeah, it's,
Barbara Sullivan was my grandma's name. Though.
Oh, really?
what was that? Well, as you guys get a chance to take a look through it, shoot me any questions or save it for our next meeting, but just don't want this initiative to fall off. Pretty cool. They definitely had some successful gardens around the community, so perhaps one's already in your neck of the woods you can go take a look at. Kind of spread around town. Next, then I'll continue to move on with just some updates from the North Carolina Sustainable Fleet Conference that I attended up in Raleigh a few weeks ago. My think I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the, I think, key takeaways I had from the meeting. And which are important, some of the initiatives we're working for with this group as far as electrifying the city fleet here. And, just providing, promoting electric vehicles in the community as well. But certainly the EV transition and infrastructure planning they had some breakaway meetings and as far as some of the topic areas. As we are looking to do our own fleet transition plan, I think there was some really good information and actually vendors that we could reach out to. There on site, I collected a number of cards, and I think I put in the meeting notes here, like one of the groups that was at the meeting. Advanced Energy, they do electric vehicle infrastructure planning. I talked to some of their folks for a bit, so as we, again, we'll probably be using some of our energy efficiency block grant money to fund fleet transition study. So as we get an RFP put out for vendors to and do the study for us, we'll definitely, we'll want to include some of the vendors that were there on site to be aware of the opportunity to help us for our electric infrastructure. Yeah, and then just moving on. There was a lot of talk about renewable diesel and just as particularly as fleets are looking at some of their heavy duty vehicles, more on the focus of some of the EV technology for a lot of those vehicles isn't quite here yet. So is that 5 years down the road before it's going to be more affordable and viable, or is it going to be 10 years down the road? In that meantime, what can cities do now? And there's certainly some renewable diesel technology out there that's available, can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the short term.
What is renewable diesel? Does it come from corn or?
A lot of it comes from soybean. So it's not necessarily you're not looking at the used cooking oil that the restaurant down the street uses. It actually comes from crops, a lot of it, and particularly to be like the B100, which is 99% made from renewable or natural sources. It has to meet an ASTM standard, so not going to put it in your vehicle fuel system. It's going to, it's got to meet a particular standard. So pretty interesting. It includes this one that I found pretty interesting. This Optimus vector system. It's 100% renewable system that you can either add to existing vehicles as a retrofit, or you can actually specify it from the factory. And a lot of the larger vehicles, or heavy duty equipment factories are, you can put the 100% renewable diesel on the vehicle right from the factory. So there's I think one local government fleet that they highlighted with this group was, I think, the District of Columbia. They are retrofitting 100% of their, well, I think they retrofitted, but now they're ordering, get new trucks with these systems on it. All of their garbage trucks are running on the B100. So just an opportunity to make more of immediate impact on your greenhouse gas production with your fleet, as opposed to waiting to some EV technology that may be 5-10 years down the road. You know, if your truck replacement cycle is, you know, 8 to 10 years already, you know, if you're ordering new trucks today, it's something to look into. If they can lower greenhouse gas emissions 60 to 70%, I think, with all of these systems, so pretty significant impact. So I found that a good takeaway from the briefing. A number of different systems in levels of whether it was renewable diesel or they had some propane, compressed natural gas and so on. So the bridge technology that's out there. I know we've already looked at that in infrastructure. But that was a cool thing about the renewable diesel. The infrastructure is not so big. You know, if you just have a separate fueling tank that's I guess the problem right now is there's not a whole lot of suppliers right here in the immediate southeast. Cost for renewable diesel is higher than regular diesel at this point, at least in our areas. In some parts of the country, it's cheaper. So those are some of the considerations. Next takeaway is just all kinds of cool technology coming out in regard to electric vehicle infrastructure. Again, I included a couple examples. This first one was from a company called InPower. Particularly when you're looking at what kind of upgrades am I going to have to do to my building, the electricity infrastructure? Am I going to have to upgrade the panels? What kind of interconnection? Do I need to look at? Is there going to need a new substation? This InPower, they're actually over in Europe right now, but they're expanding here in North America. It's pretty cool if they were here at the North Carolina conference. But they have these panels that you can install outside of the building that will handle the load in there. You can expand them, 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units based on your needs. And so all of the power requirements come out of that as opposed to impacting a particular building you may have. So it would certainly still be coordinating with Duke Energy in regard to what particular they have to put a new transformer in or anything like that. But it's just technology that's less impactful for any on-site buildings you have. And really, you're looking at a large fleet, and you're going to have all kinds of future expansion. It's technology that's now coming available. So you would install these units, and then the satellite, the chargers themselves would actually be satellite structures away from it. So that's some other pretty cool pictures of entire sites installed with this, but information I have in this one sheet is on the initial baseline. And the other one was from actually a North Carolina company called Atom Power. Again, just some more expandable new technology kind of fleet focused as opposed to individual chargers. So they actually have like a patent pending circuit breaker that goes inside a panel that they would install on site, which really, I think the coolest thing about this is it really helps with the demand management side of what the fleet and the EV charging would do for your site energy. So you can really tailor when the vehicles are charging, and helps distribute the amount of electricity going to each EV charger, so I think just the whole area around the infrastructure that's going to be required to charge entire fleets is really getting much more dialed in regard to how it's going to impact your whole electricity usage for the city facilities. So just trying to stay on top of all this new technology that's coming out. There's so much information. Every year there's new stuff out there. But this Atom Power, I think they just received some award for new technology within the state that they came through one of the technology challenge competitions that they have within the state out there in the Triangle area. And, these guys won, so pretty cool stuff. That was all from the technology conference. I don't know. Is anybody else up there? Any questions from the Zoom folks?
Not for me.
I'm glad the city does this, right? Allows us to go out and do this kind of research and go to these meetings and find out what else is out there. So I know it's not easy for you to do it too, but it's good that we support it.
Yeah, there are definitely all kinds of new vehicles they had on display up there as well. Yeah. One thing we're looking at is what's going to be the best and most efficient way for us to go about our fleet transition. Again, that's kind of why we're looking at doing this transition study and plan.
What was it? Wasn't there some news article recently about Duke and EV charging? Like how much they're going to charge now? How does that impact?
I think that was related to it's kind of like a pilot program that they were just giving you can charge as much as you want for a flat rate fee per month to a private residential customer.
Yeah, it was in partnership with a couple brands too. It was GM, Ford, BMW, I think was the other one, or may have been Mercedes-Benz, but it was only 3 companies that they had this partnership with.
I will add, we're approaching the final stages of our design for the new parks maintenance facility we were working on. And I think right now we have plans to add 5 locations for EV charging of our city fleet vehicles that will occupy that building. Not that we have any electric vehicles at this time, but we're going to design and put it in so that we're ready when it comes back.
Hope to get some grant funds to start offset that. Next on the agenda then is just a update in regard to really just education and outreach. I think that we could perform as this group just in regard to getting information out there to city residents about what we're doing and opportunity for residents to utilize clean energy or EV information that we could push out. Just I think Dave had a recent meeting with communications folks. Provide them that.
Yeah, so Jared Patterson is the city's communications officer. He hasn't been with us very long, but I can say he's definitely making an impact and changing the way that we think about communication in a good way. I asked him to be prepared to come to one of these meetings. So he will be doing that. Not sure if it'll be in October or November. But he at this point, not much to report other than just to say he's open to trying to meet what needs we think we have through the city's quarterly newsletter or any of our social media options. You know, he's got a lot of tools in his belt, and he's willing to try and use them to help the cause. So,
Yes, that's exciting.
yeah, positive interaction. So, to be continued for that.
Very good.
Did Jared come from Brunswick?
He came from Texas.
Oh, okay.
Maybe Brunswick, Texas. The last thing under item 3 is just the recent Green Drinks event that happened a few weeks ago. It was pulled together by really a private sector here in town. Some of the folks from LS3P were contacted by the USGBC in regard to kind of trying to get a kind of sustainability focused green building professional development event going here in Wilmington again. So the inaugural one happened a few weeks ago at the Eagles Dare facility just up the street, which was kind of, I think they picked that spot because it was cool, kind of reuse of an existing facility. But myself and Chad Kramer from our planning and development department were invited to attend and give information just in regard to the city of Wilmington's existing green buildings that we already have, as well as some of the urban planning. Just to give a presentation about what's going on within the city. But yeah, we just wanted to give the group here an update just in regard to, it was a well-attended event. There was probably 20, 30 people there somewhere.
Yeah, at least.
Kat attended as well, and you know, beyond just giving the presentation and being able to do that, I think what I found most impressive was just the number of people that stayed on after the event, just the level of engagement, kind of questions, kind of a wide variety of professionals that attended the event. So I was really excited to see that level of interest on this private sector here. They're obviously were hungry for it, and they're beginning to get more and more requests in their professional world for sustainable design. And I think they were had a lot of questions in regard to what can the city do to help incentivize things for the private sector. While we do have our own sustainable municipal building policy that we're still working through the process and hope to have in front of city council soon. Again, that's just focused on municipal construction. So what can we do here in the city to help incentivize and encourage green building in the private sector? So this was just the first event. The plan is perhaps for quarterly events to go on in the future. So certainly keep y'all apprised of those as they come along. But just wanted to share that it was a positive first event, and that.
It was really good. Lots of good networking, easy networking, not awkward networking. And there were lots of different sectors there, and we even had some elected officials there, but I think they were wearing a different hat, even though they were called out, but they may be involved in building or construction or something else too. So that was nice though to see them there.
So I provided the presentation in the meeting notes that Chad and I talked about. So just kind of for general information, you guys are flip through there, any questions or anything come up, just let me know. Happy to answer anything additional about it. Questions now or in the future, so. Yeah, good first event, and let y'all know as future ones come along.
Fantastic. So, thank you all for those updates. And the last item is the upcoming Clean Energy Advisory Committee Annual Report.
Yes, so our goals are to provide annual report to City Council, much November of each year. So that is quickly approaching again. I imagine we'll probably follow a similar format for the report this year, just talking about the history of our committee, our accomplishments from this year, as well as what we're looking at to focus on for next year. So right now we've got that presentation scheduled. It's still going to be second meeting in November. Targeting right now. Rich, who's not here today, as the chair of the committee, he'll be presenting it. But we'll certainly have to prepare for that for you all to review and provide any comments on.
Good. Anyone have any questions or comments? Generally, or about the presentation? Well, thank you. Looking forward to that. We did a survey at the beginning of this whole Green Energy Task Force, right? Might be interesting, maybe not for this year, it's way too, but to do another follow-up survey, see how it's changed over time for next year. It takes a few years to get anything implemented anyway, so no reason to do it every year.
Climate change.
Destroy everything.
Be more in my face.
All right, well, with that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Sean. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Excellent. All right. All for it.
Thanks. Great meeting. And thanks, Sean, for the presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, I can't believe I was